Our goal for tonight's program is to help families and students learn the processes required to receive academic or physical accommodations at public and private colleges. You'll hear how these processes differ from those in high schools. We are fortunate. No, please come on in. Just start. We are fortunate to feature a panel of subject matter experts from local colleges, along with the Department of Vocational Rehabilitation, to discuss how they work with students who receive accommodations to enable them to have an equal opportunity to succeed. Get ready to ask questions to prepare your students' next steps toward college. And thank you for attending tonight's program.
Lori, thank you so much. So we are going to get right into the meat of our program this evening. I am going to introduce our program panelists. So as you've heard already, we have done several sessions about college going this week, and we have one more tomorrow at the North Side Branch location tomorrow, where we will have the KHEAA RV to answer questions about going to college as well. And so our panelists, we're going to go right starting here. Dr. David Beach is Director of the Disability Resource Center at the University of Kentucky. And his bio, and I'll make sure you all have bios if you hadn't picked one up already, his bio will be over here on the table. And so next to Dr. Beach is Miss Lisa Lagani. She is the coordinator and Title IX coordinator, as well as disability services at Georgetown College, right up the road. And so we're pleased that she can be here to represent smaller institutions. We have next to her Miss Ashley Tackett. Ashley, she too was at a smaller institution. She was the Disability Services Coordinator at Transylvania, and then has recently moved to the Opportunity Middle College with Fayette County Public Schools. So thank you so very much for being here. We have Christina Four. She is Vocational Rehabilitation Counselor, specifically with the Office of the Blind. And next to her is Mr. Jonathan Carr, who is a counselor with the Department of Vocational Rehabilitation here in Lexington as well. And so welcome to each one of you. This is our panel of very smart subject matter experts. So whatever questions you will have, they will be able to answer. I'm absolutely confident. And so what we'll do is a quick 5-minute overview. We're going to hear from each of the panelists. We're going to ask them to tell us a little bit more about their role and what they do to help support students at their respective colleges and at their respective agencies. So Dr. Beach, we'll start with you if that's all right.
That's fine. Well, last in, first out, right?
Well, David, I'm sorry.
First up, I apologize for being late. I made the mistake of parking on campus this week, or today. So the role of the Disability Resource Center at the University of Kentucky is, again, to fulfill the requirements that we have set with the Disabilities Act and the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. We are tasked with ensuring that our students have an equal or equitable opportunity to participate in our services or in any educational aspect that any other student that can participate. So, you know, the challenge with the university, with a bigger university, is obviously we're a big university. We're sprawled across what seems like miles and miles, but I'm sure it's not that far, only when I'm trying to walk it. But you know, so our role is to make sure that we continue to focus on accessibility, and sometimes it has different perspectives on a big campus. It's not just about making sure that the doors are automated or there are ramps. Is there, are there opportunities for students to travel across the campus if that's where the way their courses are set up. So we, a lot of times work on access, not only just in the classroom, but as well as we have to deal with parking and housing and different types of areas that students find themselves in, and we ensure or try to ensure that the students that we have, we work with have equal access, even in student activities. So I joke around, John Calipari used to call our UK fan base the Big Blue Mist, but we were the Big Blue Mist first because we literally are in every place on campus, and because we have a responsibility to do that.
Thank you so very much. Ms. Ladani?
Yes, so hello, thank you for having me here. So the role at a smaller college is actually exactly the same as in a larger college. We have the same legal requirements, we meet the same needs for the students. The challenges are very different. So at a small college, like I represent Georgetown, but I have worked at another small college in the past. The challenges are quite different. The resources are much less resources available to students. Often the buildings are inaccessible. So one of the roles that David might not have as much as I do is I have to move classrooms to a building that's accessible if there's a student who has a physical disability. So that's same with residence halls. Not all residence halls have elevators. So if you have a student with a physical disability, they need to go to a residence hall that is accessible to the first floor or an elevator. So the challenges are different, but the role is really just the same. The days are quite interesting, and I know David can attest to that. So we basically do whatever comes through the door on any given day. So I love for you to be all here and prepare well in advance for your students to arrive on campus, but we have many that are not prepared, and they show up. And in week 2, we are now in week 2 or week 3, and they say, I need accommodations, and nothing has been prepared yet. So I'm really happy to get the word out that the sooner you think about going to college with a disability, really the better for the student, but also for everybody else involved. Yes.
Thank you.
Pass on.
Ms. Tackett?
So I did work at Transylvania University doing the exact same thing that they did, and they pretty much summed up that role. Now I have moved back with Fayette County Schools, and I work with a unique program called Opportunity Middle College. And it is for juniors and seniors, rising juniors and seniors can apply, and we select a finite number of students each year, depending on how many we have going out, dictates how many we allow to come in. And students are able to, we have 2 full-time teachers on campus. We're located in the classroom building on BCTC, and we are in the basement. We have 2 full-time teachers and a part-time teacher. They help the students finish their their high school requirements, maybe like English 4 and Algebra 2 or pre-calculus or something like that. And then the rest of the students' time is spent taking their college classes. So if a student begins at their junior year, first semester of their junior year, then by the time they finish, they could have an associate's degree. There's plenty of time for that. If they are wanting to go to a 4-year university, then they can just take all of those credits with them. The students who begin as seniors can accumulate around 30 to 32 hours of credit that they can then take to the university. We have liaisons at BCTC who will help with the transferring process of credits and that sort of thing. In my job that I do, I am a special education teacher, but I also work with the accessibility coordinator at BCTC to make sure that my students are getting their accommodations in their college classes. I cannot physically go to the college classes, but most of the accommodations that I provide for them in their high school classes can also be given in their college classes. Like for instance, use of a testing center, priority seating, that sort of thing. So I make sure that my students know who the accessibility coordinator is, how to get their accommodations. Because one thing that I did discover when I was doing a job such as theirs is that many parents assume that the IEP or the 504 goes with them to college. It does not. It does not automatically go. Students have to self-identify, and they have to come to their office and say, I had an IEP in high school, and I would like accommodations in college. I also found that students who did not have 504 plans, maybe for a psychological condition like PTSD, anxiety, that sort of thing, something that might not have warranted an IEP, a 504 in high school, is now going to be a factor in college. And so I had students who applied for accommodations for other health conditions, and they may not have previously had accommodations in the past. Those have been academic accommodations as well as residential, because right now in high school they live with you, so they don't need any residential accommodations because they don't live at the high school. But when you go to college, suddenly some of the things that you're needing that you need at home, you maybe a wheelchair accessible shower. Well, that's not an issue in high school, but it is in college because you live on campus. And so those types of things, that student would apply for an accommodation for residential purposes so that they could get the assistance that they need. So that is basically what I do. If you are interested in the Opportunity Middle College, I'm happy to talk more about it with you. I brought some business cards, some shameless advertising, But yes, so that's basically what I do.
Thank you much. Ms. Ford?
I'm Christina, and I work with Voc Rehab. I'm a Voc Rehab counselor for people who are blind or have severe vision issues. I work with age 14 and up to help them through their career path. So if they decide to take the college path, that is something we try to support if they need accommodations as well. If they need orientation mobility, that's white cane training, we can go on the college campus. We have an orientation mobility specialist that will work with you or your child to maneuver the campus just like any other college student. We have assistive technology person who, sometimes the schools don't have some of the equipment and they may need extra equipment. We may go in and do an assessment to see what that student needs. That's visually impaired. We have different types of software. We teach them how to use like cell phone, like talk to text, voiceover, those kind of accommodations because some of them don't know how to use their phone. I also deal with deaf-blind students that come into the office and look at what type of accommodations they may need in order to hear instruction, in order to participate, be able to do Zoom or Teams or whatever that other students are doing. We encourage them to always go to the disability at the school to make sure that they're letting their teachers know and other staff that they work with that they have a disability, because we want them to be able to advocate for themselves. That way they're getting their extra time, taking tests. If they need a talking computer, they might have a private area where they go where the rest of the class isn't, so that way we make that accommodation. They may have extra test time due to the fact that they're not able to take the test like paper and pencil or on the computer like everybody else. So we make sure that when they sign for us to help in college, they have to sign a student responsibility sheet. And part of their responsibility is going to the Disability Resource Center at the college because they need to be self-advocates for themselves. We stay with them throughout their college career, and afterwards, we're here. A lot of people forget, they get their degree and they move on. We're here to stay with them until they're employed, so that way if they need accommodations on the job, we can go on the job and check out their job site and help make accommodations as well. A lot of them might be living on their own for their first time, so we also have independent living services who will go in and she will do an assessment. For a good example is I had a deafblind student going to college for the first time, and we were able to get a talking alarm clock, and it buzzed under his head to wake him up. And it flashed, and it had big letters and everything. So he was able to see it. We have bioptic driving program. It's driving, we always joke around, it's driving with the blind, but there's certain qualifications that others can meet for that. We have a specialist that will do an examination. If you pass that examination and you pass your first test with a bioptic driving instructor, then you can go on to the program. If you don't qualify and you don't pass, it's kind of like the end of the line. You won't be able to drive, but like everything else, eyesight changes, there's new medication out there, so we're always there to help out. I have several students that are currently in school. They always have to provide certain paperwork, like their class schedule, their financial aid, student aid report, their grades. We do look at grades if they need accommodations from us, because it is an eligibility program and you have to make sure that you're staying in touch with your counselor. A lot of people forget and they get into college, and without having those paperwork, we can't help assist with things. So part of their requirements is not only working with the Disability Center, but they're keeping us up on what's going on in school, how are they doing, do they need tutors, what's keeping them from getting the grades they need. So those are some of the services that we provide.
Mr. Carr?
Yeah. So Christine and I, we both work for the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation. Our focus is really with the vision impaired, and so the office I work in is more of a general population. So I'll talk about the purpose of the agency, and is to assist Kentuckians with disabilities to obtain employment or maintain employment. And so typically a referral would look like someone would come through the door and they say, my goal is to go to work, or my goal is to further my education and then pursue employment. Like she touched on, we are an eligibility program. So folks who are applying for services, they have to have a documented diagnosis. That could be a vision impairment, hearing impairment, mental health diagnosis, hard of hearing as well. And so one of the things that we look at, one of the terms that people will typically will hear is disability. And so they'll often will think that we are affiliated with the Social Security Administration. We are not affiliated with them. We're a state agency. That's a federal program. And so as we're looking at eligibility, we're trying to determine what are the limitations that this person is experiencing that's a barrier to their ability to reach their goal. And so that's what we're looking at when we're determining eligibility, because we are in an eligibility program. So where we are at this point as an agency, since we're talking about transition, there is a heavy emphasis on transition. And so some of the services that we can offer would be vocational career assessment. That may be a tool that can be used to help a student identify what they want to pursue post-secondary level. Assistive technology is another service that we can provide. That could be some of what she touched on, which would be Kurzweil, which is a program that can be installed on the computer, and it can read the textbook to the student, which may be helpful. And a smart pen, which is another accommodation that a student could receive. And that's a really neat tool because it looks like a regular pen. If you're not familiar with it, it looks like a regular pen, and they're taking notes, and it will read what is on the paper back to them, or what the instructor is speaking at that moment, which really ties everything back together. Some of what she also touched on is we do provide job placement services upon when the student exits college. So that's another service that we can provide to them. We also do provide driver's training as well. We don't focus on vision impaired component. That's really what they do. Ours is just going to be more about trying to provide more independence for that student. So that's some of what we provide, and I can expand upon that, as questions come as we're here.
Sounds good. So it's now audience participation time. Is there anyone who has a question right now? Go ahead.
My son has currently an IEP, and he did receive through the College Board for the SAT, was it? Additional time on his tests. Now, what's the first step we do? I mean, do we apply to the university, the college, and then if accepted, then we go to the disability services? So we don't do that in conjunction with it, just after?
So otherwise qualified students are what are considered protected under the ADA and the Rehabilitation Act. So if the student's otherwise qualified, meaning they've passed what is the typical admissions process, we consider them otherwise qualified, and therefore, if they need accommodations to level the playing field, that it's at that point where the student can engage our services. If you're asking about kind of the time, the sweet spot when it's not too early but not too late, usually any time after the student's done their orientation and received their grades, that's a good time to meet with the Disability Resource Office. It's usually in the summer when things are a little more calm as well. Unless there's housing, sometimes housing can be more, especially at the University of Kentucky this year, there's a little bit, if a student needs a housing accommodation, you can never really start too early. But we always recommend student be accepted, and then we can start services at that point.
Okay.
Can I add? So I have actually a slightly different approach. I suggest to parents that, especially if the student hasn't decided yet which college they want to go to, is when they make their college trip or forgot the visit, to also meet with the disability coordinator, because especially they need lots of accommodations, because not all colleges will be a good fit for the disability. So if it's just extended test time, that is a very common accommodation that probably doesn't even need to be considered. But if you have more significant disabilities, I would say talk to the disability coordinator, see, or visit the building, see how accessible is the campus. I think disability will not be considered in the admissions process, so that is not a fear that they have to have. But students can or do not have to even disclose, but they can say to the admission counselor, can I meet with various people across campus? And so often admissions counselors bring the students by my office, and I'm happy to sit down with them and see what's realistic on this college compared to UK, for example, who has a lot more resources. But UK is also a huge college, so you might be in a class with 400 other students, or at Georgetown you sit in class with maybe, if it's a big class, 19 students. So, but that's things I think that admissions counselors not necessarily tell you. So I think it's good to visit with a disability person before making a final decision. Right.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that, and also ask what their documentation policy is,
Yes.
because it varies widely.
Yes.
Ours is, if you've seen one, documentation requirement at a university, you've seen one at a university. Some accept 504s, some do not, some, ours is one where we're happy for the documentation in a 504 and IEP, but that's not where we are planning on ending. And sometimes we have students that come out with more accommodations. It just kind of depends on the disability. But we have to have that individualized interaction to sort of work out. We make sure that we see every student as a student and not categorical disability. So there's no real automatic for any accommodation. It's, what's your unique need? We do have places that that we're limited. It is different. in high school than it is to college. We're looking at equity versus, whatever services in high school that they need to get through, and ours is about leveling the playing field. So, but it's important to learn what the documentation requirements are, and then that way, because that will have probably a greater impact on how fast things go versus any other factor, I think, that might be in play. Because once we have the documentation, most of us are going to have some kind of interaction with the student and then be ready to give them accommodations. It's not nearly like as long as it may take in high school.
Dr. Beach, can you expound on where they may be able to find documentation guidelines for specific colleges and universities?
So it has to be on the website of the Disability Resource Office. And then have to is probably a tough word, but we have to display that. So yeah, so that should be there. And if not, they should have posted who the person is that's in charge of that area and contact them to get a copy of that.
Yes, and I know at Transylvania, when I was there, because it was a smaller school than UK, I had a little bit more time to meet with prospective students, and like she was saying, to see if they were a good fit, or if the campus was a good fit. Now at Transylvania, like we took the IEP and 504 as supplemental documentation, so the main documentation had to come from a provider of some sort, whether that be a mental health provider or a pediatrician, whoever. Now, my students that I have at Opportunity Middle College, when I've gone with them over to the accessibility office, because due to the pandemic and the fact that there's doctors and different providers are still backed up in terms of seeing patients, it's harder to get that documentation. And so right now they are accepting the IEP as the documentation. But like I said, as David was saying, it varies greatly from one place to another.
So, I have a question. Say, for example, Amy is a senior in high school, has that IEP, individualized education plan, and has some accommodations through her high school. Will she have the same type and amount of accommodations when she begins her college experience?
I jumped in first.
Okay, so I can say flat out, it's probably a no for all of us. So the amount of accommodations can vary, as well as the substance, I guess, of accommodations. It really depends what accommodations the student had in high school or in K to 12. So in K to 12, sometimes accommodations lower the academic standard. What I mean by that is if a student or the class, for example, gets an assignment where they have to do, I don't know, write a 10-page paper. Sometimes students with disabilities in high school get the reduction to you only have to write 5 papers. That ends once they graduate high school. Once they enter college, every student has the same requirements in every class, regardless if they have a disability or not. So the accommodation maybe could be that they get more time to finish the paper, which is problematic on its own, but that's maybe for another to discuss for another time. But so anything that might lower the standard is not an accommodation that will carry over. I see IEPs where it's written on there that the teacher will explain to the student what the question means, for example. That is also not an accommodation that is done in college. Of course, students will have the opportunity to ask a clarifying question, like all students have that opportunity, but it's not specifically given to just this one student because they had an IEP in high school. Another common one that doesn't carry over would be maybe the student will get written notes from the teacher about what they taught in class today. Some professors share their notes. Most professors don't even have notes that they would share. And we are not asking professors to write notes to give to that student. What we do instead is we provide a note taker for the student, or we ask another student in the class to share notes, or we allow You mentioned it earlier, the smart pens to use in class, which will record what the teacher says in class. So we do other accommodations, but no, it's a flat out no. The accommodations are useful to see what they had in high school, but it does not mean that they necessarily get the same accommodations. But some accommodations are pretty universal, like extended test time on exams is a very common accommodation. That will most likely carry over.
Ashley, did you want to expound?
Yep.
I think that it kind of depends on what the accommodations were. By the time they get to high school, most of the accommodations are pared down to like exactly what they need. And I taught elementary special ed, and where they had a list this long of accommodations and supplementary aids and services and all of that. By high school, we try to pare it way down. That's also where your child needs to know, this is what works for me, this is what I need, this is not something I really use very often. And that way they can go in and advocate for themselves of, hey, I really need preferential seating, I really need to have a dorm room to myself because of this, that, or the other thing. I need, basically, if they're able to advocate for what they need, it's usually something that's pretty reasonable, and it's something that we can provide at the college level. So if they are coming to college with a huge laundry list, then I would say no. But if it's something that's pretty pared down to like common accommodations, then for the most part, we can meet in the middle and find something that would work for them.
And let me make one more point too, along with that, is sometimes there may be things that are just not a big deal in high school, but because of kind of the setup in college or going to a university, that we end up doing more accommodations related to that. For example, students with type 2 diabetes, many of them use and check their sugar or are alerted by their phone. So, and in high school, that's usually not a big deal. Well, in college, in a testing environment, you can't have any electronics, but we can't, take that away from a student. It's a health-related issue. So we write parameters around accommodations to make sure that's the case, or that if they need water, or if they need food, or if they, if they need to use a smart pen or digitally record courses, those are the things that sometimes can be, more specific college or university related accommodations. They can sit or stand or leave abruptly. Those are all sorts of things that were kind of a given in high school, but we have to memorialize them in an accommodation so that it's clear that the student has that need and should be accommodated.
So how are these accommodations memorialized so everyone at the college understands and knows what accommodations have been agreed to between the individual accommodation center, DRC, accessibility center?
So typically, once we agree on what the accommodations are going to be, it varies a little bit from school to school. When I was at Transylvania, I drafted a letter with the accommodations, and it was given to the student, and the student was responsible for giving it to the professor. I had some students who had anticipated that they might not need accommodations in a certain class, so they didn't give the letter to the professor. Now at BCTC, my students are given a copy of the letter, but then the accessibility office then sends the letter out to the professors as well. So the student signs a release and says, yes, this letter's okay, this is what I want, and then the accessibility office sends it out from there. And also in terms of how the professors would know how to do things is I did a lot of professional development with the professors so that they would understand that when an accommodation says this, then this is what it means. When it says this, this is what it means. And this is, and as being at a small school, David can't necessarily do that all the time because it's so many professors, but at being at a smaller school, you could meet with the professors and kind of explain to them what certain accommodations look like in the class.
So at my current institution, I create the letter of accommodations, it's called, and I email it to the student. And then the student can choose who to share it with. And it's good for one semester. And so they can share it with one professor, but not the other. So it's up to them what they do. At a previous institution I had worked, there was actually a software where all accommodations were listed, and the student could just log onto the software and pick the accommodations that they want for each class and just electronically send the letter directly to the professor. That was very cool. But currently I don't have that. But are you having using it?
Technically, I've got 2 of them right now because I'm not getting one to work. But we also are the same in we do provide the letter to the student or provide it to them electronically where they can go to our website, log in, and download their own letter. We do not disclose to the faculty and that's like if I was to tell you one of the things besides documentation requirements that would be important, and I as a parent would ask or did ask when my daughter was entering school, is that ask about how the students, how the disability letter gets to the faculty. Make sure you're comfortable with that. We always gave control to the student. Now, with that brings some problems because sometimes the students don't turn it in until the night before the test. Sometimes they don't turn it in at all until the end of the semester, and then it's difficult to address those, to get that stuff corrected. But we've always been encouraged our students to be advocates, and it's their information, and if they don't want a faculty to be aware of it, we talk about what potential consequences, what's your plan, or if you need it, we have that discussion, but we allow them to make that choice. And other schools don't, and that's fine. I'm not judging them. I'm just giving you the reason that we do it. Just to talk to, we have an online portal. We only require the letter to be updated once a year. Students can take, but they can't add. They can take away, but they can't add. And then it also will funnel into their testing scheduling and make sure that the faculty know and can see the accommodations, but we never provide any information specifically about a disability. That's a student's story to tell. If they want to disclose, they can disclose, but we only provide documentation and like she indicated, and maybe an explanation of the disability to the faculty, or of the accommodation, but the disability is not something that we release. And it doesn't really matter because all sorts of disabilities can still be related to accommodation of extra time or low distraction setting. It could be anxiety, it could be depression, it could be chronic health, it could be, or ADHD. So it's really not important what the diagnosis is, it's the functional impact of that diagnosis and how we can utilize it, or how it impacts the student's experience and then lets us accommodate it.
I had a question on the vocational side of things. With you all are dealing with technology and using those to supplement. What is your all's interaction with the faculty and the university as far as or help with the and where I'm thinking is I'm thinking of potential issues with either professors or with maybe even employers thinking, well, I don't want them to have that tech, or because others might not have that tech, something along that line is what I'm thinking.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I guess I'll answer two ways. One is, I typically as a counselor don't have direct interaction with a professor
Okay.
or faculty. What I've seen over my time is, we do this assessment, they meet with a rehab technology specialist, and that's what their expertise is. And so they'll meet with that specialist, and they'll make a recommendation as to the type of technology they believe is going to be most accommodating to that student's limitations and or disability. From that point, there is a training about how to use that technology. The technologist also provides a training to the student. From that point, what I see or have seen is they go forth onto the university. One of their obligations, like she stated, is to register with the DRC. And I guess, to be honest, I think it's our hope that there is an intersection with the DRC and how they may help facilitate to ensure that there's no issues for the student to use the technology. I haven't seen any in my 16 and a half years where that's been an issue for a student to use tech in the classroom, just to be honest. And so I guess to further answer that question, we do help individuals who are currently working who may need technology in the workplace. I'm going on Monday to do one of these assessments with a technician, and so basically it's really to accommodate that person's disability, and they have that access due to ADA, and so it's really left into that realm. So folks it's typically not an issue in the workplace because folks tend to empathize with that individual. Has been my experience.
In order for the voc rehab to contact the disability center, like if you had a question and they're like, well, you need to contact, there has to be a confidentiality sign to allow us to even communicate with them. I've only had it done once with a student because the Disability Resource Center wasn't making the accommodations that the student needed, and they had to sign the agreement for me to talk to the Disability Resource Coordinator. And because the coordinator didn't have any experience working with people who are visually impaired, we kind of talked to them like, this is what I would recommend. I gave them some examples that I would have done. My background's in OT, so I kind of gave the Disability Resource Coordinator some ideas that might work for that student. And if that didn't work, to give us a call back and we would redo the assessment for assistive technology if they needed something different. But I mean, it all worked out, but that's another thing. We won't contact the Disability Resource Center for your child. That is something it's the child or family's responsibility to do so, just because of that confidentiality.
But you make a good point, and one that I think is a larger university, some of our faculty are struggling with, is the role of technology. And we actually have, especially related to like AI and things like that, that's a whole other area. But we've actually had some pushback from faculty because there's some research out there that says that actually the use of technology to take notes or whatever is not as good as somebody actually physically writing it. So it becomes then a pedagogical issue with them in terms of, what is beneficial to the student. And they look at it sometimes from a deficit perspective where, well, they only need this, and then if we train them, then they won't need it anymore. But that's not the way it works with many of our students with disabilities. No matter how long that they try to write, if they have a visual impairment, it's not going to matter. So they need the technology. And then the other situation sometimes that we have to deal with is the faculty will come and say, I've got a no technology policy in my class, and the student gets their transcription or they take notes, and that may break confidentiality. And that's true, it might, but that's the student's decision to make, not a reason to keep the student from using the technology. So so that actually we do have to deal with that.
Yeah, can I add something real quick about the confidentiality? So when I meet with students, I tell them that I cannot maintain confidentiality. I try to maintain privacy, so I try to keep all information as private as I can, and I do not share, like David earlier said, I do not share any details about the diagnosis, just accommodations. But accommodations itself are often cannot be kept confidential. So if the student, for example, doesn't test in the classroom, the other students will notice, and they will ask. There's nothing we can do about that. Same with technology used in the classroom. That's just something that the students, I sometimes actually role play with them. So someone is going to ask you, the first year, the freshmen are the most worried about that. So I tell them, so someone's going to ask you, where do you take your exams? How come you're not in the classroom? What are you going to say? Just have like an answer ready. And I tell them often, just say, oh, I get so easily distracted, so disability services allows me to test elsewhere. That's, you know, you don't have to provide any information about why or if you're not comfortable with that. But the questions will come and there's nothing we can do on our end about that. So confidentiality is only in regards, at least in my opinion, only in regard to the disability, to the nature of the disability, but not about the accommodations.
So let's pretend we have a student by the name of Rick who has quadriplegia. So who does he contact before he graduates from high school to help him identify and pay for personal care attendant services?
Yeah, I mean, that would be us. Yeah. And it's really ideal, I think. So if we have someone who's exiting high school and their goal is to go to work, applying early in their senior year is probably a good time to start applying for services with us. So that we can ensure that all the services are in place once they start to attend college. And you bring up a very unique scenario because personal care attendant services, in that scenario, they probably should start applying a little bit, probably their junior year, because that's going to require a couple things. They're going to have to hire a personal care attendant. That's a really big component. And voc rehab is not, we don't hire, we don't interview and or have people readily available to work as a personal care attendant. It's going to be the student and or family's responsibility to interview and hire that person. One of the unique things about our agency, we're able to help cover the cost of personal care attendant services primarily while the student is attending school, not during the summer while they're at home, not on any of the breaks while they're at home. It's solely while they're participating in the educational program. And so, would you like me to kind of expand upon what that looks like as well?
Please, I think it would be helpful for people to know.
You know, so let's say this Rick is eligible for services. We're able to pay for a portion of, I guess maybe I should answer it like this. It's a negotiated fee for his personal care attendant. We typically will pay what the market kind of is, let's say kind of for like a CNA, and that may be like $15 an hour. That's the rate that we would be willing to pay typically on average. And so the family's responsible and student's responsible for submitting a timesheet. That timesheet comes to voc rehab. We then would send a check to the family, and they would then pay the personal care attendant. They have to have workman's comp insurance. They have to file taxes. It's a very, very drawn out process. And so if that was a scenario that we were encountering, I think applying for services in that junior year, because it is a very long drawn out process.
Do you all meet with students in high school who may have similar services, probably not personal care at that point, but other services? Are you meeting with the ARC team, the IEP team? Are you included in the transition conversation in the high school?
Yeah, very much so. We are required to attend the RSC meetings for students with disabilities. So hopefully we're at those meetings as much as possible. Every school has a counselor that's responsible for that school. Sometimes it may not be possible for a counselor to attend every single one of those. I cover Bryant Station, so sometimes there's a meeting conflict, and I'll work with the director of special education to make sure that they have my contact information to ensure we are able to schedule a meeting with that student so that we can make sure we are helping with the transition of that student exiting high school. We also have other services in the high school as well as it relates to transition. There's pre-employment transition services. We start working with those kids, as Christina said, at age 14. Those are going to be freshman and sophomore students. They're not typically going to be working with the counselor at that point. They're going to be working with a community rehabilitation program, which is outside of our agency, but we pay for that service. And then as they are receiving, there's 5 components to pre-employment transition services. I wish I could remember all 5 off the top of my head, but it's, you know, college readiness, work-based learning opportunities, self-advocacy, and I'm missing the other 2, but they're going to get those 5 services. And then once they receive, let's say, like 100 hours of those services, at that point, when they're finished with their sophomore year, then they'll probably start applying for services with us, so that we can make sure we're helping them transition from high school.
Does the same hold true for you, Ms. Ford?
Yeah, exactly. Yep, he covered it all.
Can I make a reference back to the first part about, you know, voc rehab? It is often, you know, supports attendance. So at the university setting, it's specific in the law that we do, the universities or the colleges don't have to provide attendance. Some do because they have different funding resources, some are not able to, but we still have to accommodate them. So that means to ensure that they have access, you know, to the student when they need the student, be it in class or in the residence or the dining hall or whatever. So we still have to make sure that they're accommodated and have access. We just typically don't pay for them.
So could that look like a larger room in the residence hall?
So if they needed a private space or a space for the attendant to stay, maybe if it's a safety issue at night, or they need to be there really late or really early, it's about being flexible, it's about giving them access to the building. It's about, yes, depending on the need. We have accessible rooms in all of our residence halls, so making sure that those are available as well.
Any more questions from our audience?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm at the right platform, but still I'm asking. I am legal resident but not US citizen, and I just wanted to learn the educational process for the non-US citizen. And she's my daughter is gifted talented in gifted talented program, but I'm not sure what are things I need to prepare, the scholarship thing, and then what are the chances to get her admission like in UK.
That's actually a great question because it's called the Americans with Disabilities Act, right? Yeah, I'm also not a citizen, so it applies to all residents legally in the United States, though. So regardless, we are not asking for citizenship or anything like that. The documentation requirements are the same, regardless if this is a citizen or non-citizen. Accommodations will be the same.
I've received, we've had to go find some translators before. So that doesn't change, and I know voc rehab has its own, and I don't want to talk over them, but they have, there's still possibilities, yeah.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, but she's not disabled, but still I thought that if I can get some more information at this platform, if not, then I can just pass on.
Can you say that?
She is not disabled as
Okay.
such, but just I'm here to learn some more, what are things she can prepare ahead of time so that she can get the admission, scholarship, or maybe cost effectively.
Well, I think we're happy to talk to you more specifically a little later in this program, and we can give you some of those. We still have some resources up here that will be beneficial, so we can speak more specifically about your daughter's individualized situation offline.
Thank you.
I don't want to share your daughter's personal information in front of everybody, but thank you. So I have a question about a student who is deaf. Her name is Gina. Will she receive American Sign Language interpreters and note takers to help her communicate what the professor is teaching or to attend particular college events?
So if that's what they are requesting as an accommodation, we have some students that use American Sign Language, but others also use a program called CART, which is computer aided, just the R, real-time transcription. So that's actually verbatim or almost verbatim transcription from an off-site vendor who then, takes what was being said in the classroom and directs back to the student. So we typically have many more students that utilize that, but if a student comes in and requests ASL interpreting, then yes, we provide that.
Is that because you have CART as opposed to another institution that may not have CART?
Well, we all have to provide the accommodation.
Right.
Yeah, so whether we like how much it costs or not, it has to be provided, because we've said that this student is otherwise qualified.
Yes.
So, then if they're otherwise qualified and they have an eligible disability, then we have to provide the accommodation, unless it fundamentally alters the course or the program, lowers the standard, or is too unduly burdensome financially or bureaucratically. And even with the financial piece, that's not at the department level, that's at the university level. So there was a case where Johns Hopkins said they couldn't afford an interpreter, and the judge said, you've got a $1 billion budget, you can find $30,000 for an interpreter. So, that's for a university the size of the University of Kentucky, that's not an issue, but, we have to provide that, and, we just, when we ask, they say, you just have to pay it. You took federal dollars, you have to pay it.
So the difficulty with the interpreter sometimes comes in, or comes, is that the right, anyway. What happens often, or not often, I shouldn't say often, it happens maybe once, and then both sides of the room, is that a student comes to my office and says, I want to go to this event tonight. Can I get an interpreter? Well, we don't have any staff interpreters on campus. So the chances are I'm not going to be able to get an interpreter on such short notice. So several days advance notice is the smart thing to do for both sides. So sometimes, yes, sometimes yes, we want to provide the accommodation, but sometimes it's just not possible to do so in such a short time frame.
So for visually impaired students, what types of accommodations do you see some students seeking, asking for?
Is that for me?
Well, it can be for you, and it's most likely going to be for them as well, too.
Some of the things that I'm seeing that students are requesting ahead of time before they start college is large screen monitors, docking stations, larger type tablets or things that they can take notes on at school, maybe like a touchscreen laptop versus the Chromebook. Those are the more common things that we see. I've had one student who needed a CCTV, if you guys are familiar with that. They're pretty large, they're getting smaller, but the new ones have like a camera on where they can like put the camera on to whatever's going on in the front of the class, what's on a whiteboard, and it will show up on like a screen for them to see. So those are some of the typical accommodations that we're getting. That's kind of typical, but everybody's different and it's geared towards whatever their needs are. Just because when we send out our assistive technology tech, he does it on an individual basis, and he looks to see what the student's needs are. Just because Sally has a large screen TV, a docking station, and a CCTV, the next person who comes in with the vision impairments doesn't mean that they're going to get the same accommodations, because it's on a, it's per that individual's needs. So a lot of people come into our office and they're like, well, Sally got this and this and this and this, and this is what I want. And that's not how Blind Services looks at everything. It's on what that person's needs are. They're an individual. They may not need as many accommodations as the next person who comes in. So it just all depends on that person's disability and what their needs are. So
We had once a student at a former institution that requested Braille books. And that is quite the task. It takes months and months and months to provide those. So we had to ask the students to register for the classes in the fall, basically the previous fall, just so we had enough time to get all those books printed into Braille. That was quite the undertaking. But I don't think that's a less common accommodation nowadays. I think not. Also, that was great for the student. The student was, before they received the Braille books, was struggling in the classes. After we provided the Braille books, would do much better academically. So that was really what they needed, to touch with their hands, to read that way. But it seems like Braille seems to be a dying art, right?
I've gotten some people asking for help with that, but I think with new technology coming out, there's just so much, like the programs that read, your text, or you can talk to text and it reads you right back to you, like Fusion and JAWS and some of those other things.
Yeah, so that student, for example, was a Spanish major, and reading it out loud would have altered the program, because part of the task is to read the language, not to hear it. That's a different skill, I guess, but to read it. So that was not really, technology in that particular case was not really an option.
But we do have the responsibility to make the material that's created by the faculty or the program or the university, we have to make it accessible. So, and if they, to some extent, what they use as preferred communication. Sometimes it's Braille, sometimes it's something that, that needs to be large print or whatever, within reason. But we're responsible for providing that in an accessible format. The issue becomes the student still has to purchase the book or the materials, but we have to contact the publisher through a program called Bookshare and ask the publishers, do you have this in an accessible format? And they have how many? They have what, weeks? They have weeks before they have to get back with us. So we don't get that overnight, and then when we get it, then we have to break it down. So that can be a time-consuming process as well. So yeah, any conversion does take a while. So the more time that we have, the better chance we'll have of getting it done.
Questions?
Yeah, I had a couple related to, I think you had mentioned that the accommodations are reviewed per semester, is that correct?
I might have misspoken there a little bit. So the accommodation letter that I sent out will say fall 2023. So that's good for the semester. We don't have to revisit the accommodations. If they want to request the same accommodations next semester, all they have to do is tell me, I want my accommodation letter for spring. So it's not like so we don't have to review the accommodations per se, but the letter will be per semester.
Per semester, okay.
Is it per year, like you were earlier saying?
Yeah.
Per year? Yeah, so that's,
Move to you.
okay, that's rather unusual. Most colleges will have it per semester, I want to say, but even if it's per year. But at my school at least, they do not have to visit with me every single semester or even every year. But if they want to add accommodations, they can usually email me if the accommodation doesn't make sense to the disability, and I might have to ask them, let's meet, explain to me why you need X, Y, Z. So we can add accommodations even throughout the semester, but then they're not retroactive. So So what happened in the classroom happened, we cannot change it. Just moving forward, we can implement new accommodations. So we don't actually have to wait until next semester.
Okay. And then with respect to going to a community college and then transferring to a four-year university, is there any transfer of information around accommodations related to that, or is it separate processes?
You can do, so I have a student from Transy that went to law school. And so when she got to the law school, she contacted the accessibility coordinator for the university. And then that person, she let me know that this person was going to need X, Y, and Z. And then I sent that, what I had to that person. And now they may have some extra steps or something, but they shouldn't have to start completely over. So my situation now, my students who get accommodations through BCTC, those can be, that file can more or less be taken to like UK, and then he won't have to reinvent the wheel. To do, I'm sure he'll still want to meet with them and make sure everything is good, but it won't have to be completely done over.
Okay, thank you.
So another imaginary student, Rita, can't type very well due to her health condition, which is multiple sclerosis. Will the college provide someone to help her type or keyboard her papers?
So at my, yes, I will connect them to what we have, because there's
You two
so
can
much.
fight over it and decide who's going to answer.
So much technology out there these days, and that might be different for, I don't know, a doctoral thesis or something where you have to do a lot of research. But at my university or at this level, they probably can use technology to write their papers. Yes.
We will pay for a scribe, I think, don't we?
Yeah, I mean, that is something that we can do.
We could do for an accommodation if the college doesn't pay for it.
Yeah, and I was also thinking about, she talked about a lot of speaking software. I mean, there's Dragon, naturally speaking. There's, laptops have come a long way. I mean, used to Dragon is something we would purchase pretty frequently. But just technology's come a long way, and so a lot of talk to text has evolved, but I mean, a scribe is something that, Voc Rehab could potentially help with.
Have you had any reluctant students to use that type of technology?
Oh,
Yeah.
And want to have it typed
I have more.
by another person? Mhm.
I have more students who were reluctant to use a scribe than technology, or a reader.
Or a reader, yeah.
Even
that's-
more so.
Yeah, a reader.
Yeah.
And even a bioptic device where they put it up to their eyes so they can see the front of the class. They always carry it on their necklace. Either they don't use it because they don't want to look different from their peers, especially if they're younger. They have it and they just sometimes don't use it because they just don't want to look different. Especially if it's specially lined paper, or if they're carrying like a little magnifying glass just to read. Some of them will wait until after class to bring out the special equipment that we've ordered for them just because they don't want to be different from their peers.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, accessibility coordinators, accessibility has come a long way over the years, and we really try to normalize having accommodations, that everyone gets what they need. That's what it's about. It's not about you're different from me and what's different is that. The campus itself tries to, and I'm sure it's the same across both, but I know at Transy, I just tried to normalize that, look, some people have this and some people get this and whatever, we all get to the same end. And so I think it's come a long way than when I was in college, and I'm not even sure we had a disabilities office. And so the culture has changed, thankfully, more so in the direction of people are used to others getting accommodations and also realizing that what the accommodations they're getting are not cheating. It's to help them, help fill in at like level and make it equitable. So,
I think inclusion starting young, because
Yes.
they're just getting used to it now.
Mhm.
With inclusion, they're seeing that so-and-so sitting next to me and they've got different looking paper.
Yep.
Or they got somebody sitting next to them taking notes. I think it's just, they're more accepting of their peers.
More questions from the audience?
Well, I know we're adult going back to school, we had bad accommodations growing up, and they need accommodations, but maybe not know what to ask, what's available. Like, is there some way that you can ask or get tested to see what type of accommodations or what's available at one particular school? I know at UK, there may be more resources available at a smaller school. However, either working with vocational rehabilitation or with the private school, like how do you know what resources are available or what's available for the student?
Well, even a large university like ours, we value partnerships like the Office for Blind Voc Rehab because they have the knowledge and the resources and the ability to help us kind of address a lot of the issues from a technology piece or many different areas. They provide a lot of valuable information and resources for us, and so we lean heavily on them if we have students that we think could benefit from their services. The trick is understanding that the time piece. If you have to give enough time for the vocational rehabilitation, to bear itself out, the eligibility, the plan development, that's the piece there is to start it as early as possible so that they have time to put all those resources to work, and then then we kind of can take it from there. But we really rely on them, and they're great partners for us.
And also you don't have to necessarily know what the laundry list is of things that they offer or that the college offers. You can just come in, and I've had students before just come in and say, look, I struggle with this, this, and this. And then we kind of troubleshoot from there. Do we need voc rehab help? Is it something I can fix? Is it something that I can work with a professor on? Something like that. You don't even have to know what's out there. Because, they have stuff that I don't even understand. And that's, you can just come in with like, this is what the struggle is, what can we do?
You mentioned testing, and that's one of the things I've written down. I want to make sure that we covered is, sometimes adults will say, I struggled early on, in high school, elementary, with certain subjects, but I've never formally been tested. And that is something that we can do. We can do a psychological evaluation. To do that, to just go out and find a psychologist to get a psychological evaluation with the learning disability battery, it's very expensive. And so we could be a really good resource to do that testing, to see if there is a diagnosis. And they will make recommendations, in that psych eval. Maybe that's kind of a starting point to have conversation, with the ERC and kind of go from there.
That's why it's so important to start early, because with voc rehab, it's not you walk in, I need service, am I eligible? You have to do the application. With the application comes signing medical forms. We look at the holistic approach on somebody. We just look at all types of disabilities. Just because I do blind service, I'm not only looking at vision, I'm looking at what other medical diagnosis do you have? Do you need like psychological testing? Do you need an assessment? Maybe you're struggling because that's not the correct career path for you, and you're like, this is what I want to do, but then after you get an assessment done, it's showing these are what your likes and dislikes are, and this is the type of person you are. You might be an introvert and didn't know it, or you may need guidance on other things, but we have it comes with the application. The application takes a while to determine eligibility because we have to wait on those medical records. We have to, for me, I definitely need to get the vision records. I have people who come in and yes, they have vision diagnosis, but sometimes they're on the borderline. Do they go to him because it's corrected with glasses, or is it more severe? Like they're gonna need surgeries, are they gonna need other things? And it might be like, okay, I'm looking at the medical record and I'm trying to determine, am I the right counselor for them? And I may have to send them off for more testing. I may have to send them off to a special vision doctor, or talk to the Retinas Association or wherever their doctors are. And then once we get the medical, we have to determine what type of disabilities they have. Is it listed on these forms? Once we get all that, then we have to determine their eligibility. And he'll even agree with me, there's a lot of paperwork. What you don't see behind the scenes, we're writing reports, like from the first day we meet you to closure. So then once we deem you eligible, then you gotta come in and we have to determine a plan. It's your plan, you have a voice, you know what services you may need, and then that's when we come in with our specialty saying, okay, I see these are the services you want. We also see that these X, Y, and Z, you might need extra testing, you may need to see a counselor, there may be personal problems going on at home, there may be other services that get added onto your plan, not just for school or not just for your job. It might be something personal that you might be working through. It may be needing, for me, it may be some of my clients need special serum for their eyes and they just can't get it because they can't afford it. So we need to look at, can we justify paying that? What is your career path? Because our goal is to get people to work. If they go to college, we want to, or they're in high school, to see if they want to go to work, or if they want to go to college. If they're going to college, we want to see you through to make sure you're employed.
And some universities also have grants and things for students for different services. So for instance, if your student needs educational testing and maybe they just never received it or whatever, there are, I know at Transy we had like a community partner who we would go to for educational testing. They would do the educational testing, and then we had an emergency grant fund that would then pay for the educational testing. We also had mental health professionals that were on staff that were licensed to be able to give psychiatric diagnoses, and so then that was free to the student because it was on campus. They were able to get that type of assessment done, and we didn't end up having to go through voc rehab. But so that might even be a possibility for students.
So if I understood your question correctly, or let me just answer from the angle that I see. So I often meet with students who have absolutely no idea what accommodations they need. So they might have an anxiety disorder, and they want to meet with me, but they don't know what to request. So that's where it comes in really helpful that I'm experienced, and sometimes if you find a new disability coordinator who might also not have any idea, but I walk the students through, so what happens when you sit in a classroom? You know, so what are your barriers? What are your struggles? What are your struggles outside of the classroom? So then I try to find accommodations that would fit that person, and I don't need that student necessarily to go through both. We have to get more documentation, because the documentation, well, some of them tell me good ideas, but many times it only says the student is diagnosed with severe depression. But how we can accommodate is often worked out between the student and the disability coordinator. So I tell students is like, try to find someone that has experience. Also Google sometimes, you know, you can find ideas online that may or may not apply to you, but at least you can get an idea to say, oh, would that be helpful for me or not? Students often at least the students I see, especially if they never had accommodations in K through 12, they have no idea what accommodations are or how it would help them or what they need. And they can verbalize, oh, I have such difficulty staying focused. I see the professor's mouth move, but it's not going in. Well, I can deal with that. I can help with accommodation for that. So I just try to draw that out. What are your struggles? But it does take some experience, so.
Well, you can also, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but the other piece is it's not forever. If you decide that it's not working, then we can change it. You know, there's not a specific time period. As long as you give the faculty enough notice that they can provide the new accommodations, that's perfectly fine. So it's not as, it's not precise. We know that there's a lot of learning as we go. So it can be a process until we kind of get it dialed in. But you can change it at any time, and it's yours. And it's again, it's an individualized process. So we talk about again, what are the barriers, and then we try to address the barriers through accommodation.
For example, like if someone's taking classes online and they're not with other people one-on-one, like that within itself, the technology, my daughter grew up with technology. I didn't, and then trying to do everything within a certain period of time, trying to adjust to that. I don't know, I guess I would have to talk specifically to someone in person, but it's just trying to figure it all out. It's just like, okay, I got this all, you got this many days to do, try to get it all together, and that can be difficult, especially with disability. And then another thing is like, I know when you were saying your job is for vocational rehabilitation, needs to get a job, but what if someone's disabled and maybe not, cannot afford to lose disability? Like, is there a balance?
Yeah, that's a good question. We work a lot with individuals who receive Social Security benefits, disability benefits, and they want to go to work. And there is a threshold. I don't know exactly what that threshold is in which you can work as long as you stay if you stay under what they call significant gained activity, SGA. If you stay under that, it doesn't affect your Social Security benefits. If you exceed SGA, significant gained activity, and it affects your benefits differently whether you receive SSI, Social Security Supplemental Income, versus Social Security Disability Insurance. And so it's really important to have that conversation with the Social Security Administration. That's one conversation you can have. We can also do what we call in our office, we can do a benefits analysis. And that's a service that we pay for. And so you would meet with a benefits specialist, and they would talk to you about how going to work could potentially affect your benefits. And that really comes down to how much do you want to earn, and then they can then calculate how that affects your benefits. Again, it goes back to, do I want to stay under that amount where I can work and earn some money, maintain my benefits, or do I want to go into a trial work period, which is a Social Security incentive, where you can earn as much as you want for 9 months, and then you get to decide, do I want to get off of my benefits and continue to work? It's kind of that balance, but it probably starts with us and having that benefits analysis so that you can make an informed decision about what going to work looks like for you, or whoever that may be, if I answered your question.
Yeah, it is. It's just, especially if someone's been on disability for a long period of time, and then okay, well, we've given you these accommodations, so okay, you got to just snatch away, and then you have to work with it. You may not be able to do that.
It doesn't happen where they're just gonna take it. With the benefit counselor, I even have people who already have a job, and they'll sit down and plug in what they're making. Like he said, the threshold, are you going over it? Are you still under it? They will go step by step with you and sit down, and you get a printout. So like say you're making $12.50 an hour, the benefit counselor will plug that in to what they're receiving for disability, and it's a printout, and so that person knows how many hours they can work without going over if they want to keep their disability. Or they're making this much now, and they were making this much on disability, but they're making this much. Which one's better, you know? And so it's just individualized when they do that benefit counseling. It's just geared towards the person.
Yeah, and don't feel pressured. You know, it's important to have the conversation to where you set, for the individual to set a goal for themselves. And it may start out as, I want to go to work, and I want to keep my benefits. Let me see what that is like. And then as one becomes more confident, they maybe see where, you know, maybe what their potential is, and you can make that decision from there. But try not to feel pressured about having to get off of your benefits, you know, while also trying to go to work. You can make that informed decision.
And not just the benefits of Social Security, but keeping your health insurance.
Yeah.
They'll talk to you about, okay, you still can keep your health insurance, you can keep this or that. It doesn't, they'll go through on how it affects you personally. And then you can make that decision based on whatever they have to say.
Yeah, Miss Evangeline Johnson, she's our CWIC. That's an acronym. I wish I could tell you what that actually means, but I know that she's great at doing those benefits analysis, and she
Specially trained, yes.
Yeah.
So each of you have like a contact?
Yeah, I have my cards. I have cards here, and you know, I'd be glad to help. So David has. David, would you try to remember what that?
I'm trying to remember. I can't.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I came up with the name, but I can't remember.
David used to be with
So
us.
while David is thinking on that,
It's not going to come back.
any final questions? And then we'll ask our panel to give us any last words of wisdom that they'd like to share. And we will wrap this evening's event.
If I could give just some, some knowledge, one of the things I think it's important as adults, taking your child, and it's hard to make that transition from seeing them as a child to an adult, but that is part of what the college experience is. And understanding that we will communicate with your student, and if you need to know things about their case or what's going on, that's a conversation you need to have between them. We will treat them like adults, and because because they are. And sometimes that transition is a difficult one, but it's important that you take the time now to prepare for that and understand that, and help the student be able to advocate for themselves, to ask for accommodations. These are civil rights. They have a right to these accommodations, and help them, empower them to not be ashamed of their disability. It's very critical that, this is how we've slowly opened the door, far too slowly, or too long it's taken to do that, but this is how we've opened that door. Enough people have come through, and there's no shame in it. So, be sure you focus on that in terms of assisting your student be prepared, and know that there's lots of people that are out there that are there to support those students as well. Some are specialized in the office, but other universities have lots and lots of support systems that people spend entire careers building. And make sure you also look for those, at the college or university you're thinking about, because there's far more advanced resources that are out there to help learners than certainly when I was in school, which is a long time ago.
Ms. Ladani?
Yes, so I'm not actually sure what my final thoughts would be. So I also try very hard to destigmatize the word disability. I tell them I use the word disability for several reasons. The main reason is because I don't talk about the nature of the student's disability. So once you are registered for my services, I won't even remember if you have depression, or if it's PTSD, or if you have Crohn's disease or migraines. What I'm focusing on is the accommodations. And accommodations are nothing, this is an accommodation. We don't call it that, but this is what, without the classes, you are all fussy. And so I'm using that, and I want you to use your accommodation the same way. It's not giving you an advantage, it's just making you see clearer, like I do with my glasses on. That's the one thing. And the other final thought, I guess, is many students that I see have, well, the first years especially, it's not the disability that really holds them back. It is time management. It's not being college prepared. It's not understanding the difference of, oh, high school was hard. Well, maybe it was, but college is really going to be hard. It's lots of expectations that professors have. It's not telling the students, oh, remember, tomorrow's a test. The students will have to remember that on their own. It's those kind of things that have nothing to do with the disability, but just kind of learning an entire new culture. And not using the resources that are really, like David said, that are readily available to them. Tutoring services at Georgetown College, for example, it's available to everybody. You don't have to be a student with a disability. If you need tutoring, you request a tutor. And many students are so reluctant to ask for help, and I try to tell them, you're not asking for help. I'm not going to help you. I'm not writing your papers for you. I'm not going to sit and take the exam for you. You do this all on your own. All you're doing is making good, wise use of the resources. So just rephrasing sometimes those words that stop students from reaching out, and I'm not even going to say asking for help, but just reaching out to request some seeing what's out there, making use of the resources. I think that would be my advice.
I think mine would be especially for seniors, to make sure that they attend their final IEP, their final ARC. Then that way they know what is in that document. They know what, they can make sure that, that they have everything fine-tuned the way that they want it, and that they're going to college with a resource that, hey, this is what I had in high school, this is what worked for me, what can we, how can we come together? Then that is part of what David was saying, like advocating for themselves and knowing knowing what they need. Also, from what Lisa was saying, that whether a student has accessibility needs or not, they all struggle with navigating college. They all struggle with, oh, I might need a tutor for this, or oh, I might need to manage my time better, or oh, I might need, X, Y, or Z. Normalize that for them. It has nothing to do with their accessibility issue. It is every college freshman struggles with time management, with being proactive, with doing all of the things, living away from home for the first time. They all struggle with that. So yes, going and just seeking out the services that are available at the college or university. Almost all of them have tutoring centers. And they can even start, if they start nowhere else, they can start with the accessibility coordinator and just say, I need some help.
Ms. Ford?
Well, I guess if we remind students that they have to be involved with the Disability Resource Center. And even if you think your student or your family member or yourself doesn't qualify, it doesn't hurt to come and talk to us and give us a call. You can make a referral on yourself, it's okay. We'll just call and follow up and find out what you guys need, and if you're not in the right direction, we'll certainly be there to assist you on where you guys need to go.
Yeah, I'll echo a lot of what she said, and if your student has a diagnosis, please contact us. If you think there's a possibility your student has a diagnosis, or you know someone, tell them to contact us. People often say, well, what does voc rehab do? We do a lot of different things, and it's very individualized to what that person's needs are. Again, just the earlier we can get involved, the better. We just want to be a resource to help accommodate your students' disabilities so that they can be successful.
Well, please join me in thanking our subject matter experts, our panelists. I hope that you learned a lot and that you can take some of this information and help support yourselves and your students. We will offer this as a recording so that you can take another listen, share it amongst others who you know who could benefit. So thank you very much for joining us this evening. I know it's been a long day for you. Thank you again. We have some resources. Speaking of being a resource, the Lexington Public Library is happy to be a resource. We have information here we'd love for you to take. And if you'd like to get the contact information of folks who are here, please do so. Their bios are over here as well. Thank you so very much for coming.